Reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time. Those three words had once been a war cry. In July 2017, they had echoed off the mahogany walls of the House Financial Services Committee room like cannon fire. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin had sat in the witness chair, stammering, sweating, trying to run out the clock with bureaucratic filibustering. But Maxine Waters wasn't having it. She cut him down with the rhythmic precision of a butcher, wielding parliamentary procedure like a cleaver. The video had exploded across the internet, 20 million views in 48 hours. There were gospel remixes, T-shirts, hashtags. Auntie Maxine became the patron saint of the resistance, the queen of throwing shade, the woman who refused to let powerful men waste her breath. It was a moment of absolute triumph, a master class in political dominance. February 14, 2026. Same room. Rayburn House Office Building, room 2128. The high ceilings were the same. The heavy, gold-framed portraits of past chairmen still stared down with judgmental eyes. The smell was the same, a mix of lemon polish, old paper, and the distinct metallic scent of high-stakes anxiety. But the energy in the room had shifted violently. The air wasn't electric with resistance, it was heavy with dread. It was the kind of room where careers didn't just stumble. They went to die. Maxine Waters sat in the ranking member's chair. The Republicans had taken the House back, but her position on the Financial Services Committee was still a throne of immense power. She adjusted her glasses, checking the microphone placement. She looked comfortable. Why wouldn't she be? She had survived 12 presidents, countless scandals, and the shifting tides of American culture. Today was supposed to be a sparring match, a hearing titled Government Accountability and Ethics in Federal Banking Oversight. The witness requested was Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. She had agreed to it with a smile, thinking she would control the theater. She would ask the questions. She would make the speaker squirm for the cameras. It would be good optics for the base. Then the double doors swung open. Mike Johnson didn't walk in with an entourage of aides whispering in his ear. He walked in alone. He wore a navy suit tailored to perfection and a red tie that seemed to absorb the camera lights. He was 53 but looked a decade younger, with the unblemished face of a choir boy and the eyes of a constitutional lawyer who had already memorized the verdict. But it wasn't his appearance that silenced the room. It was what he was carrying. In his arms were 3 banker boxes. They were white, heavy, and stuffed to the brim with files. He walked to the witness table, the sound of his shoes sharp against the floor. He didn't say a word. He lifted the first box and set it down. Thud. Then the second. Thud. Then the third. Thud. The sound echoed, a triple tap of finality that seemed to vibrate through the wood paneling. In the press gallery, reporters stopped typing. Photographers leaned over the railings. "What is in the boxes?" Waters smiled. It was her polite, camera-ready smile, the one she used right before she gutted someone. "Mr. Speaker," she began, her voice dripping with the sweetness of poisoned honey. "Thank you for joining us." Johnson didn't smile back. He didn't engage in the ritualistic Washington pleasantries. He took his seat, adjusted his microphone, and slowly, deliberately, opened the lid of the first box. "Ranking Member Waters," Johnson said. His voice was soft, carrying the gentle rolling cadence of Louisiana. It was respectful. It was polite. It was terrifying. "Before we begin, I'd like to ask you a few questions." Waters' smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. "The witness is here to answer questions, Mr. Speaker, not ask them." I think you'll find these relevant to the topic of government accountability, Johnson said, pulling the first file from the box. The header on the document was visible to the cameras. Federal Election Commission. It was thick with neon yellow highlighter markings. Johnson looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. You made a career out of 3 words, Chairwoman. Reclaiming my time. It was very effective. But today, I think we need to talk about how you've been reclaiming taxpayer money for 33 years. The room went instantly, suffocatingly silent. A camera shutter clicked, snap, 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 like a machine gun in the quiet. Someone in the gallery gasped audibly. On the Democratic side of the dais, heads snapped up. This wasn't the script. This wasn't routine. Waters reached for her water glass. Her hand bumped the rim, and water sloshed over the side, darkening the green felt of the table. She steadied it, but the tremor was visible. Johnson didn't wait. He didn't give her a chance to bang the gavel. Chairwoman Waters, you represent California's 43rd Congressional District. Is that correct? It was a lawyer's question, a trap disguised as a formality. The gentleman knows I represent the 43rd District, Waters replied, her voice tightening. I have served my community for over 30 years. 33 years, to be exact, Johnson corrected gently, since 1991. And during those 33 years, you have claimed to fight for some of the poorest, most underserved constituents in the state of California. Correct? I have dedicated my career to advocating for the poor, the marginalized, and the forgotten. Waters rehearsed, finding her footing. Yes or no, please, Johnson said. Poor constituents? Waters paused. The trap was closing, but she couldn't see the teeth yet. Yes. Johnson reached into the second box. He pulled out 2 large-format, high-resolution photographs mounted on foam core boards. He stood up and placed them on the easel facing the committee. I'd like to submit these for the record, Johnson said. He turned to the screen behind him, clicking a remote. A massive split-screen image appeared on the monitors, looming over Waters' head. On the left side of the screen was a mansion. It was a stunning piece of architecture, a 6,000-square-foot colonial revival estate. It had a manicured emerald lawn, a wrought-iron security gate, and ivy climbing the brick facade. It whispered of old money and safety. It was located in Hancock Park, one of the wealthiest enclaves in Los Angeles. On the right side of the screen was a war zone, boarded-up windows, homeless encampments stretching down city blocks, blue tarps flapping in the wind, chain-link fences topped with razor wire, piles of uncollected trash rotting in the sun. This was South Los Angeles. The home on the left, Johnson said, pointing to the mansion. That is your house, Chairwoman, purchased in 2004, currently valued at approximately $6 million. He pointed to the right. The neighborhood on the right. That is District 43, your district, the one you represent. The murmur in the gallery grew into a buzz. Johnson leaned into the microphone. Chairwoman, your constituents live in poverty. 43% of them are below the poverty line. 161,000 people are struggling to eat, struggling to pay rent, struggling to survive. And you live in a $6 million mansion. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Why? Waters bristled. Mr. Speaker, I do not see what my personal residence has to do with banking oversight. The gentleman is making a false equivalency between personal success and public service. I have worked hard my entire life. Where is your house, Chairwoman? Johnson asked. I just stated that I purchased my home in Los Angeles. What congressional district? Silence. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The air conditioning kicked on with a low hum, the only sound in the room. She wouldn't say it. She couldn't say it. Johnson answered for her. It is in California's 37th District, represented by Congresswoman Sidney Kamlager Dove. Your house isn't in your district, is it? Due to redistricting you've had 20 years to move. Johnson cut through the excuse like a knife. You represent poverty. You represent the struggle. But you go home every night to Hancock Park. You don't drink their water. You don't breathe their air. You don't drive on their potholes. You represent them, but you don't live with them. Johnson gathered his papers, his face impassive. That's not representation, Chairwoman. That is tourism. The accusation of tourism hung in the air, a toxic cloud that Maxine Waters couldn't wave away. She looked to her left and right, searching for support from her Democratic colleagues. Jamie Raskin was studying his notes with intense fascination. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving in a rapid blur. Katie Porter was whispering to an aide, her eyes averted. No one was meeting Waters' gaze. No one was rushing to bang the table and call for a point of order. They could feel the shift in atmospheric pressure. This wasn't a standard partisan bickering session. This was an execution, and no one wanted to be in the splash zone. The gentleman is trying to police where members of Congress live, Waters said, her voice rising in pitch, a defensive reflex, which is frankly beneath the dignity of the Speaker's office. Members often live near their districts due to boundary changes. This is a distraction. I live in my district, Chairwoman, Johnson replied instantly. His voice didn't rise, it just hardened. Louisiana's 4th. Benton, Louisiana. It's the same town I've lived in for years. I shop at the same grocery store as my constituents. When the price of eggs goes up, I see it. My children went to the same schools. My wife walks the same streets. When I cast a vote, I go home and look my neighbors in the eye. He reached into the first banker box again and pulled out a stack of laminated demographic sheets. Let's look at the reality of the people you claim to fight for. He clicked the remote. A new slide appeared on the monitors, a grid of devastating statistics. District 43, poverty rate, 43%. Unemployment, 50% higher than the California average. Homelessness, up 264% since 2009. That is 40,000 people sleeping on concrete, in tents, under bridges. Johnson looked at her. Violent crime is double the national average. The schools in your district are in the bottom 10% of the state. He clicked to the next slide. Hancock Park, your neighborhood. Crime rate is a fraction of District 43. Property values are 10 times higher. The schools are top-rated in Los Angeles. Median income is over $200,000 annually. Johnson stepped out from behind the witness table. He walked to the center of the room, standing in the open space between the dais and the audience. It was a breach of protocol, a move that commanded total attention. You represent poverty, Johnson said, pointing to the screen. You live in wealth. You represent crime. You live in safety. You represent failing schools. You live next to excellent ones. Explain that dichotomy to me. This is a personal attack on my family and my safety, Waters shouted, slamming her hand on the table. It is a factual comparison of your choices, Johnson countered. You won't live there, and I think we both know why. Because after 33 years of your representation, District 43 isn't safe. It isn't clean. It isn't prosperous. And you know it better than anyone because you failed to fix it. Johnson turned his back on her and faced the gallery. I didn't come alone today, Chairwoman. I invited some of your constituents. They're sitting right there in the front row." He gestured to 3 people sitting on the wooden bench. They looked out of place in the hall of power. Worn clothes, tired faces, carrying the invisible weight of a hard life. "This is Marcus Johnson," the speaker said. "No relation. He is a 40-year-old father. He grew up in District 43. When he was 8 years old, he survived a drive-by shooting outside his grandmother's house. He watched his neighborhood crumble for 3 decades. Marcus stood up. He was a big man, but he stood with a quiet, trembling dignity. "Would you like to ask him about the district, Chairwoman?" Marcus didn't wait for permission. He looked up at the dais, his eyes locking onto Waters. "Congresswoman," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "I lost my brother to gang violence in 2019. He was 16 years old. We dialed 911. We waited 45 minutes for the police to show up. 45 minutes. He bled out on the sidewalk in front of our house." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the stenographer's fingers hovered over the keys. "I'm 37 years old," Marcus continued. "I've lived in your district my whole life. I have never seen you, not once, not at a community meeting, not at a vigil, not walking our streets. You're on TV all the time. But where are you when we're dying?" Waters' mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in her career, she had no words. Johnson gestured to the woman next to Marcus. "This is Kesha Thompson, single mother, 2 children. She works 3 jobs. And yet, for the last 2 years, she has been living in her car, in your district." Kesha stood. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red. "I voted for you, Congresswoman," Kesha said, her voice shaking. "Every election. I stood in line. I believed you. You promised change. You promised help. You promised jobs. I'm still waiting. My kids are hungry. We sleep in a parking lot. But I see your house on the news. I guess some people got help. Just not us." Waters reached for her water glass again. Her hand was shaking so badly that the ice cubes clinked loudly against the glass, the sound amplified by the microphone. She took a sip, but she couldn't swallow. "And this is Jamal Roberts," Johnson said, pointing to the teenager. 17 years old, student at Crenshaw High School. The boy stood up. He looked young, terrified, but determined. "I want to go to college," Jamal said. "But my school has 1 guidance counselor for 800 students. We don't have AP classes. Our textbooks are from 2010. The teachers quit every year because they're scared. I'm trying. I promise I'm trying. But the system is broken, and you're the one who is supposed to fix it." He paused, looking at the woman who had been his representative since before he was born. "Have you ever been to my school? Have you ever walked down my hallway?" Jamal sat down. Johnson let the silence breathe. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. It was a vacuum, sucking the political air out of the room. The gallery was murmuring now, a low rumble of realization. Johnson walked back to the witness table and leaned forward, his hands resting on the banker boxes. "Congresswoman Waters," he said softly, "have you ever walked their streets at night? Have you ever sent your children to their schools? Have you ever worried about a bullet coming through your living room window? Have you ever been homeless?" "The gentleman is grandstanding," Waters finally yelled, but her voice lacked its usual thunder. It sounded tinny, desperate. "I am asking questions," Johnson said, "and you are not answering them." He pulled out another stack of photos from the box. Real photos, harsh photos, homeless camps stretching for miles, boarded-up storefronts, yellow crime scene tape fluttering in the wind. "This is what they live with," Johnson said, holding up the images. "Every single day, for 33 years of your tenure. And you won't even live there." "I live in Los Angeles," she insisted. "You live in the other Los Angeles," Johnson corrected. "The rich Los Angeles, the safe Los Angeles. You won't live in District 43 because you know the truth. After 3 decades of your leadership, it isn't safe. The schools aren't good enough. The crime is too high. And you know it, because you failed them." Johnson stacked the photos into a neat pile. "Your constituents live in poverty," he said, his voice ringing with moral authority. "You live in a $6 million mansion. That is not representation, Chairwoman. That is exploitation." "Reclaiming my time," Waters shouted, falling back on the only weapon she had left. "Reclaiming my time." Johnson looked at her. It was a look of profound pity. "Chairwoman, with all due respect," he said, "you can't reclaim time you never had. And you have been reclaiming taxpayer money for 30 years. Let me finish." The phrase hung in the air, turned against its creator. The trap had snapped shut. But Johnson wasn't done. He reached for the second box. "Now," he said, "let's talk about your daughter." The phrase, "let's talk about your daughter," was not a question. It was an indictment. The room, which had been buzzing with the reclaiming my time reversal, fell into a deeper, colder silence. Mike Johnson didn't rush. He reached into the second banker box and pulled out a stack of documents that was visibly thicker than the first. These weren't photos. They were financial ledgers, dense with rows and columns. "Let's talk about Karen Waters," Johnson said, placing the stack on the table. "And let's talk about the Slate mailer program." He picked up the first document, holding it up so the cameras could catch the Federal Election Commission header. "For those watching at home who don't know," Johnson explained, "a Slate mailer is a piece of campaign literature. It's a brochure mailed to voters that lists a slate of endorsed candidates. It's an old-fashioned method. In fact, Chairwoman Waters, you are the only federal candidate in the country who still uses this system at this scale." He looked at her. "And it is very lucrative. Not for the voters, but for your daughter." Johnson clicked the remote. A new slide appeared on the monitors. It was a simple bar graph, but the bars were so high they almost went off the chart. The title read, "Payments to Karen Waters." "Since 2004, Johnson read from the ledger, "your campaign committee, Citizens for Waters, has paid your daughter, Karen Waters, over $750,000. He let the number hang there. $750,000. $750,000, Johnson repeated. "That is more money than most of your constituents will earn in 20 years. And what did she do to earn this fortune? She coordinated Slate mailers." "The Slate mailer program is a legal and FEC-approved practice," Waters shouted, her voice trembling with indignation. "It helps inform voters." "It helps inform your bank account," Johnson shot back. "Let's look at how it works. Candidates pay you to be on your mailer. They pay anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 for your endorsement. That money goes into your campaign account. And then, your campaign account writes a check to your daughter for management fees." Johnson walked over to the chart. "It is a pass-through scheme, Chairwoman. You are selling your influence to other politicians, and you are using your daughter as the cashier." "My daughter works hard," Waters insisted. "She manages the printing. She manages the distribution." "Does she?" Johnson asked. "Does it take $750,000 worth of effort to print a brochure? Or is that money just a way to transfer donor funds into your family's pocket without running afoul of the gift tax?" He pulled out another document. "Let's calculate the opportunity cost. $750,000. Do you know what that money could have done in District 43? $750,000 could have funded the salaries of 15 full-time teachers for a year at Crenshaw High, where Jamal has one guidance counselor for 800 kids. $750,000 could have provided housing vouchers for 150 homeless families like Kesha's for a year. $750,000 could have created job training programs for 500 young men like Marcus. Johnson turned back to her. But instead, it went to Karen. Your daughter got rich. Your constituents got nothing. Why? The gentleman is attacking my family, Waters cried, standing up now, shaking a finger at him. This is beneath you. My family has served this community. Served? Johnson asked, his voice incredulous. Or profited? Because it's not just your daughter, is it? He reached back into the box. Your son, Edward Waters. He has profited from business contracts with entities you helped secure funding for. Your husband, Sidney Williams. We'll get to him in a minute. Your grandson, Mikhail Moore. He was your chief of staff. Johnson spread his arms. It's like a family business, Chairwoman. Waters Incorporated. Except the business is public service, and the only shareholders are your relatives. He picked up a report from Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, CTCREW. This is a liberal watchdog group, Chairwoman. Your allies, do you know what they called you? He held up the report. The cover was bold and damning. Most corrupt member of Congress. Not once, Johnson said, holding up a finger. Not twice. He held up two. Not 3 times. 3 fingers. 4 separate times. He held up 4 fingers, staring at her. 2005, 2006, 2009, 2011. 4 times, independent watchdogs looked at your finances, your family, and your conduct, and they said, this is corruption. Were they wrong? Those were political attacks. From your own side? Johnson asked. Crew isn't the Heritage Foundation. They are progressives. They saw what you were doing. They saw the pattern. Your family gets rich. Your district stays poor. And they called it what it is. He slammed the Crew report down on top of the pile of photos. Why should anyone trust you to investigate corruption in the banking system when you have been named the most corrupt member of this body 4 times? Waters slumped back in her chair. The fight was draining out of her. She looked at the water glass she had spilled earlier, the puddle still soaking into the documents in front of her. It was a mess, just like her legacy. Johnson wasn't done. He had dismantled her housing, her district record, and her nepotism. Now, he was going for the jugular. He reached into the 3rd and final banker box. This one was marked with a red label, Treasury Debt, 2008. Let's talk about One United Bank, Johnson said. At the mention of the name, Waters flinched visibly. This was the scandal that had almost ended her career a decade ago. She thought it was buried. She thought she had survived it. September 2008, Johnson began, setting the scene. The financial crisis. The world is burning. Lehman Brothers has collapsed. The stock market is in freefall. Congress passes TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, a $700 billion bailout for failing banks. He pulled out a financial disclosure form from 2008. One United Bank was a minority-owned bank. It was in trouble. Not because of the systemic crisis, but because they had made bad investments in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They were going to fail. Johnson pointed to a highlighted line on the disclosure form. Your husband, Sidney Williams, sat on the board of One United Bank. He owned stock in the bank, stock worth somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. If the bank fails, that stock goes to zero. Your family loses $500,000. He pulled out a phone log. So, what did you do? Did you call for help for the homeowners in District 43 who were being foreclosed on? No. You called Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson. You used your position as a senior member of this committee to arrange a special meeting for One United Executives, a meeting they could never have gotten on their own. I was advocating for all minority-owned banks, Waters protested, recycling her old defense. The House Ethics Committee didn't buy that, Johnson said sharply, because the meeting wasn't for all banks. It was for One United, the bank your husband owned. And what was the result? Johnson asked. One United received $12 million in TARP funds, taxpayer money. $12 million that saved the bank. $12 million that protected your husband's stock. $12 million that saved your family's fortune. I was cleared of those charges, Waters yelled. You were cleared, Johnson corrected her, because you threw your grandson under the bus. He pulled out a letter on House Ethics Committee stationery. This is the letter of reproval issued to your Chief of Staff, your grandson, Mikhail Moore. The committee found that he knew about the conflict of interest. He coordinated the meeting. He should have stopped you. Johnson leaned over the table. So here is the question, Chairwoman. The Ethics Committee says your grandson knew. He worked for you. He lived in your world. Are we supposed to believe that your grandson, your Chief of Staff, was working to bail out his grandfather's bank, and you didn't know? I was not involved in the day-to-day. It's a $12 million bailout for your husband, Johnson roared, finally raising his voice. How could you not know? Either you knew and you're lying, or you are so incompetent that you let your staff run an ethics violation right under your nose. Which is it? She couldn't answer. There was no answer. Let's look at the contrast, Johnson said, his voice dropping back to that deadly calm. September 2008. While you were saving your husband's bank stock, what was happening in District 43? He clicked the remote. Images of foreclosure signs filled the screen. Families sitting on curbs with their belongings in trash bags. Foreclosures, evictions, despair. Your constituents lost everything. Their home values plummeted. Their jobs vanished. Did you arrange a meeting with the Treasury Secretary for them? Johnson asked. Did you get them a $12 million bailout? No, he answered for her. You saved the bank. You saved the stock. You saved yourself. And you left them to drown. The gentleman is mischaracterizing. I am characterizing it exactly as it happened, Johnson said. Your husband got $12 million. Your constituents got foreclosure notices. That is your legacy. He gathered the documents from the One United file and stacked them neatly. You have been named most corrupt 4 times because of this. Because you use your power to help your family, while the people who voted for you get nothing but speeches. He looked at the clock. The hearing had been going on for an hour. He had one more box. But that was 2008, Johnson said. Some might say that's ancient history. Water under the bridge. He paused, a slight smile touching his lips. So, let's talk about what you've been doing lately. Let's talk about the $68,000 fine you paid just last year. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of Speaker Johnson reorganizing his papers. He had dismantled the slate mailer scheme with the precision of a forensic accountant, leaving the $750,000 figure hanging in the air like smoke. But he wasn't finished. He reached into the third and final banker box, pulling out a binder that looked older than the others, its spine creased with age. Let's go back to 2008, Johnson said, placing the binder on the table. The global financial crisis. The world was burning. Lehman Brothers had collapsed. Families in your district were losing everything: jobs, homes, retirement savings. He looked up at Waters. But your family needed a bailout. The gentleman is referring to One United Bank, Waters said, her voice tight. A matter for which I was fully exonerated. Exonerated? Johnson repeated the word, tasting it. Let's look at the details of that exoneration, Chairwoman. He opened the binder to a tab marked Conflict of Interest. One United Bank was in trouble, not just because of the economy, but because they had made risky investments in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They were on the brink of failure. And who sat on the board of One United Bank? Your husband, Sidney Williams. Johnson pulled out a financial disclosure form from 2008, highlighted in neon orange. Your husband didn't just sit on the board. He owned stock, significant stock, between $250,000 and $500,000 worth. If the bank failed, that stock went to zero. Your family would lose $500,000. He clicked the remote. A timeline appeared on the screen. September 2008. One United notifies the Treasury it is in danger of collapse. September 9, 2008. You call Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson. You demand a meeting for minority-owned banks. You used your power as a senior member of this committee to force the Treasury Secretary to take a meeting, Johnson said. You claimed it was for all minority banks. But when the meeting happened, who was there? Executives from One United. And what was the result? Johnson asked. One United received $12 million in TARP funds, taxpayer money. $12 million that saved the bank. $12 million that protected your husband's stock from becoming worthless. I was advocating for my constituents, Waters yelled. Minority banks are vital to... The House Ethics Committee didn't think you were advocating for your constituents. Johnson cut her off. They investigated you for 3 years, and while they didn't charge you personally, they issued a letter of reproval to your chief of staff. He held up the letter. Who was your chief of staff, Chairwoman? It was your grandson, Mikhail Moore. Johnson walked to the edge of the dais. The Ethics Committee found that he knew about the conflict. He coordinated the meeting. He worked to save his grandfather's bank while drawing a government salary in your office. So here is the question, Johnson said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room. Are we supposed to believe that your grandson was working to bail out his grandfather's bank, right under your nose, and you didn't know? Waters stared at him, her mouth a thin line. Either you knew and you're lying, Johnson said, or you are so incompetent that you let your staff run an ethics violation in your name. Which is it? He didn't wait for an answer. He pointed to the screen again. While you were securing $12 million for your husband's bank, do you know how many homeowners in District 43 received a bailout? 0. They got foreclosure notices. You saved your family's fortune, and you let your constituents drown. But that was 2008, Johnson said, closing the One United binder. Some might say that's ancient history. Water under the bridge. He paused, a slight, humorless smile touching his lips. Waters stiffened. This was fresh. This was raw. Johnson reached into the box and pulled out a document on Federal Election Commission letterhead. It was crisp, new, and damning. Some people think corruption is just big bank bailouts, Johnson said. But sometimes it's just breaking the rules because you think they don't apply to you. He held up the document. This is a conciliation agreement between your campaign, Citizens for Waters, and the FEC, dated 2025. You agreed to pay a $68,000 civil penalty to settle multiple violations of federal election law. Those were clerical errors, Waters protested. Minor administrative mistakes. Minor, Johnson scoffed. Let's look at the errors. He read from the findings. Violation 1. Excessive contributions. Your campaign accepted $19,000 in illegal contributions from donors who had already maxed out. You took the money. You kept the money. You spent the money. Violation 2. Prohibited cash disbursements. Johnson looked up, his eyebrows raised. Your campaign made $7,000 in cash payments. Cash, not checks, not wire transfers. Cash. He walked over to the easel and flipped to a new board. It showed the FEC regulations on cash disbursements. Federal law prohibits campaign cash payments over $100. Why? Because cash is untraceable. Cash is how you hide things. Cash is what drug dealers use. Chairwoman, not Congresswomen. The gallery murmured. The comparison was brutal, but the logic was sound. What did you buy with $7,000 in cash? Johnson asked. Your report says administrative expenses. Who pays for administrative expenses in wads of bills? Did you pay your daughter in cash, too? We corrected the filings, she insisted. You got caught, Johnson corrected her. And then you used donor money, campaign funds, to pay the $68,000 fine. You didn't even pay for your own mistake. The people who donated to you paid for it. He stacked the FEC agreement on top of the One United file. Let's review the timeline, Johnson said, counting on his fingers. 2005, named most corrupt by Crew. 2006, named most corrupt again. 2008, the One United bailout. 2010, ethics investigation. 2020, illegal cash payments. 2025, $68,000 FEC fine. He looked at her, his eyes cold. This isn't a mistake, Chairwoman. It is a pattern. For 20 years, you have operated as if the rules are for other people. You have turned your seat in Congress into a family ATM. The gentleman is cherry-picking, Waters cried, her voice cracking. I am reading the public record, Johnson roared back, slamming his hand on the stack of files. These are your fines. These are your violations. These are your choices. He stepped back, composing himself. You have paid $68,000 in fines. Your daughter has taken $750,000. Your husband got $12 million. Your family is rich. He turned to the screen, where the image of the dilapidated District 43 still lingered. Now, let's see what your constituents got. Mike Johnson turned away from the stack of financial documents and faced the large screen again. The room was heavy with the weight of the evidence he had already presented, but he was about to shift the focus from personal corruption to professional failure. We've talked about your house, Johnson said, his voice echoing in the silent room. We've talked about your daughter's income. We've talked about your husband's bank. We've talked about your fines. He clicked the remote. The screen shifted from the image of the FEC settlement to a stark, data-heavy slide titled District 43, a 33-year report card. Now, let's talk about the return on investment for the people who actually put you here. He pointed to the first column, 1991, the year Maxine Waters was first elected to Congress. He pointed to the second column, 2026, today. You have represented this district for 33 years, Johnson said. That is a lifetime. An entire generation has been born, grown up, and started having children of their own, all under your watch. Let's see how they're doing. Poverty rate, Johnson read. In 1991, it was high. Today, it is 43%. That is 4 times the national average. It hasn't gone down, Chairwoman. It has calcified. Homelessness, Johnson continued. Up 264% since 2009 alone. You have been in power the entire time. You chaired the Housing and Financial Services Committee. You wrote the bills. You controlled the purse strings. And yet, there are more people sleeping on the streets of your district today than ever before. Unemployment, he clicked again, 50% higher than the state average. While California boomed, while tech giants rose in the north and entertainment giants grew in the west, your district was left behind. These aren't just systemic issues, Johnson said, anticipating her defense. These are failures of leadership. You have been in the federal government for 3 decades. You have seniority. You have power. You have influence. And yet, every single major metric of quality of life in your district has gotten worse. The gentleman ignores the structural racism that Waters began. I am not ignoring anything, Johnson snapped. I am looking at the results. You have been the representative for 33 years. At what point do you take responsibility for the outcome? At what point does structural racism stop being an explanation and start being an excuse for your own ineffectiveness? He walked over to the photos of the district again, the trash, the tents, the despair. In Los Angeles County, Johnson noted, citing a devastating statistic, Black people make up 8% of the population, but 34% of the homeless population. That is your base. Those are your voters. And they are dying on the streets while you cash checks from slate mailers. He looked at her with genuine bewilderment. How can you look at this data, 33 years of decline, and claim you have been a success? By what metric? The only metric that has gone up is your net worth. Johnson turned away from the screen and walked toward the witness table, stopping just a few feet from where Waters sat. The distance between them felt non-existent. Let's go back to the house, Johnson said softly. The mansion in Hancock Park. We established that you don't live in your district, he said. You live in District 37, but have you ever asked yourself why? I have explained my residency, Waters said tightly. You explained the what? Johnson corrected. You didn't explain the why. He pulled a sheet of paper from his pocket. It was a real estate listing. I had my staff look up homes for sale in District 43, right now, today. He held up the listing. Here is a beautiful home in View Park. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, remodeled kitchen, $2 million. Well within your budget. It's in your district. It's available immediately. He held up another one. Here is a luxury condo in Baldwin Hills. $1.5 million, gated, secure, in your district. He dropped the papers on the table. You could move tomorrow. You have the money. You have the means. Why don't you? Waters stared at him, her eyes hard. I will tell you why, Johnson said, answering his own question. You don't move there because you know the truth. You know that even the nice parts of District 43 aren't as safe as Hancock Park. You know the police response times aren't as fast. You know the grocery stores aren't as well stocked. You know the streets aren't as clean. You don't live there, Johnson said, his voice dropping to a whisper, because you don't want to live with the consequences of your own policies. You created a district where the schools fail, so you live somewhere else. You created a district where crime is rampant, so you live behind a gate in a different zip code. He pointed to the day-in-the-life split screen that was still frozen on the monitors. Your day. You wake up in a mansion. You drive through safe, tree-lined streets. You go to the Capitol. You eat at steakhouses. You go home to silence and security. Their day, he pointed to the right. They wake up to sirens. They walk past trash. They worry about getting shot on the way to the bus stop. They go to a job that doesn't pay enough. They come home to a neighborhood that has been abandoned by the woman who claims to be their champion. "That is the tale of two cities, Chairwoman," Johnson said. "And you are the queen of one, and the absentee landlord of the other." "Food deserts," Johnson said suddenly. "Do you know what that is?" "Of course I know. There are significantly fewer grocery stores per capita in South LA than in West LA, Johnson said. Your constituents have to take 2 buses just to buy fresh vegetables. You have a Whole Foods 5 minutes from your driveway. He looked at Marcus, Kesha, and Jamal in the gallery. "They live it," Johnson said. "You visit it. That is the difference." He turned back to Waters. "You won't live there because it's not good enough for you. And the tragedy, Chairwoman, is that it's your job to make it good enough. And you have failed." "You represent them," Johnson said, "but you have abandoned them." "I object to this entire line of questioning," Waters yelled, but she didn't stand up. She stayed seated, small in her chair. "Your objection is noted," Johnson said calmly, "but the facts remain." He gathered his breath, preparing for the final summation. He held up his hand, fingers splayed. "So, let's tally it up," he said. "Let's count the cost of Maxine Waters." He raised his thumb. 1. Mike Johnson stood in the center of the room, the focal point of every camera lens and every pair of eyes. He raised his right hand, fingers splayed, ready to count. It was a simple gesture, but in the silence of the hearing room, it felt like a judgment. "So let's tally it up," Johnson said, his voice carrying the weight of the evidence he had spent the last hour laying out. "Let's count the cost of Maxine Waters. 1. You live in a $6 million mansion in Hancock Park, not in your district, in a wealthy, gated enclave, shielded from the poverty you represent." He raised his index finger. 2. Your daughter, Karen Waters, has received over $750,000 from your campaign committee, a slate mailer scheme that you alone use, funneling donor money directly into your family's bank account. He raised his middle finger. 3. Your husband, Sidney Williams, sat on the board of One United Bank. You arranged a meeting with the Treasury Secretary. The bank got a $12 million bailout, and his stock was saved. Your constituents got nothing but foreclosures. He raised his ring finger. 4. Your grandson, Mikhail Moore, your chief of staff. He was reproved by the Ethics Committee for coordinating that bailout. He worked for you. You claimed ignorance. The committee called it a conflict. He raised his pinky finger, a full hand now. 5. The Federal Election Commission, $68,000 in fines, illegal cash payments, excessive contributions. You broke the law, got caught, and paid the fine with donor money. He switched to his left hand, raising a thumb. 6. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, a liberal watchdog group. They named you the most corrupt member of Congress 4 separate times: 2005, 2006, 2009, 2011. He raised his left index finger. 7 points. 7. District 43. The reality on the ground? Poverty at 43%. Homelessness up 264%. Schools failing. Crime rising. 33 years of decline under your watch. Johnson lowered his hands, looking at her across the divide. 7 points of failure, Chairwoman. 7 distinct pieces of evidence that tell the same story. This isn't about one mistake, Johnson said. This isn't about bad luck. This is a pattern. It is a career built on self-enrichment, disguised as public service. He paused, letting the phrase sink in. Some people in your district call you the poverty pimp, Johnson said quietly. Waters flinched, as if she had been slapped. "That is an offensive racist slur," she hissed. "It didn't come from me," Johnson replied calmly. "It came from them. It came from the black residents of South Los Angeles who stand on street corners with signs. It came from the people who realized that you profit from their poverty." He picked up a photo of a protest sign from Leimert Park. It featured Waters' face superimposed on a dollar bill. "They call you that because they see the mechanism," Johnson explained. "You campaign on their suffering. You get elected. You get rich. They stay poor. And then, 2 years later, you come back and do it all over again." "It is a cycle," Johnson said. "Promise, elect, enrich, blame, repeat." He looked at her with a searching expression. "Looking at the evidence here today, the mansion, the daughter, the husband, the fines, can you really blame them for thinking that?" "The gentleman is out of order," Waters shouted, but she didn't bang the gavel. She just gripped the edge of the table. "I am asking a question," Johnson said, "and I think we finally have the answer." He walked back to the witness table, leaning close to the microphone for the final question. "So, Chairwoman Waters, do you care about the people of District 43? Or do you just care about getting re-elected so your family can keep getting rich?" The question hung in the air. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Waters opened her mouth. She looked at the camera. She looked at Johnson. She looked at the water she had spilled. But she didn't speak. She couldn't say, "I care," because the evidence screamed that she didn't. She couldn't say, "I don't," because it would be political suicide. So she sat there, silent. Johnson nodded slowly. "Your silence is your answer." Mike Johnson began to pack up his boxes. He moved with the same methodical calm he had entered with. He placed the photos back in the folder. He stacked the FEC documents. He closed the lid on the One United binder. "Mr. Chairman," Johnson said, addressing the Republican chair of the committee, "I have no further questions. I believe the evidence speaks for itself." He picked up the top box. "Congresswoman Waters has spent 33 years enriching herself and her family while her constituents suffer," Johnson said, delivering the verdict. "She lives in a $6 million mansion while they live in poverty. She won't live in her own district because she knows she failed to make it safe." He picked up the second box. Her daughter got $750,000. Her husband's bank got $12 million. She paid $68,000 in fines. And her constituents got nothing. He picked up the third box. "That is not public service," Johnson said, turning to face her one last time. "That is not representation. That is exploitation." He looked her in the eye. "Shame on you, Chairwoman Waters. Shame on you." Johnson turned and walked out. The double doors swung shut behind him with a final, heavy thud. Inside the room, chaos erupted. The gallery exploded into applause, not just from partisans, but from the constituents in the front row. Marcus stood up and clapped. Keisha wiped tears from her eyes. Jamal nodded slowly. Waters sat alone at the table. Her papers were scattered. Her water glass was empty. Her career, built on the image of the fearless fighter, lay in ruins around her. She had tried to reclaim her time, but Mike Johnson had reclaimed the truth. Epilogue. The video hit the internet like a meteor. Within 2 hours, it had 10 million views. By midnight, it was at 38 million. By the next morning, 50 million people had watched the dismantling of Maxine Waters. The headline was simple and ubiquitous. Mike Johnson destroys Maxine Waters. But it was the substance that stuck. The phrase, reclaiming taxpayer money, became an instant meme, flipping her own brand against her. Young voters, who had once idolized Auntie Maxine for her sass, watched the video and saw the receipts. They saw the $750,000 to the daughter. They saw the mansion. They saw the hypocrisy. The comments section was a graveyard for her reputation. She really lives in a $6 million mansion? Her daughter got $750K? Most corrupt 4 times? How is she still there? The poverty pimp label stuck. It wasn't just a slur anymore. It was a thesis statement backed by evidence. Waters didn't resign. She refused to step down. But the power was gone. She was stripped of her ranking member status by a vote of the full House. She faced a new ethics investigation. She became a pariah in her own party, a symbol of the corruption they claimed to oppose. In District 43, the signs began to appear. Not campaign signs, protest signs. Printed on them was a simple question, overlaid on a picture of her mansion. Do you live here? She doesn't. Mike Johnson didn't gloat. He didn't go on a victory tour. He went back to work. But he had established a new blueprint for political combat. Civility, evidence, relentlessness. He showed that you didn't need to shout to win. You just needed to tell the truth. And in the end, the woman who spent a lifetime reclaiming her time found that she had run out of it. The gavel had fallen, and the verdict was in. The gentleman from Louisiana had won.